There are a lot of different ways of ranking the best books of the year, and one of the ones that I do is a book bracket. So I have the best book for each and every month, and I pit them against each other. So I thought I would go through my 12 best books of the year as chosen each month. So let's dive straight in, starting off with January. We have Hagstorm by Victoria Williamson. This is a retelling and adaptation of Tam O'Shanter, a poem by Robert Burns, who we celebrate on Burns Night in Scotland. I say we, I'm aware I sound English, I'm British. This is fantastic. It does an amazing job utilising every aspect of the original poem whilst expanding on it and making it a really enjoyable middle grade read. I obviously blasted through this very quickly because it is middle grade and intended for children, but I loved it so much. I just had such a fantastic time with this book. I highly recommend it. It's a really good one for if you aren't into Burns Night and celebrating that, then one for around Halloween as well. Highly recommend. Then with one that you're more likely to have heard of, February, I read The Toll by Neil Shusterman. It feels like it's been more than a year since I read this, but I finally finished out the trilogy and absolutely adored this book. The premise of the series is that medical advancements have come far enough now that people no longer die naturally. We can cure anything. And so there are scythes who kill the population to keep it under control and at a reasonable amount, but there is corruption, and it is all about that. It is a fantastic series. It's done so well. Neil Shusterman can do very little wrong. Speaking of doing very little wrong, I have loved every book I've read so far by River Solomon, and Sorrowland was no exception. I'm gonna spoil this right now. This was the winner of the year. It got 10s across the board on Corepile, which is G from Book Roast's rating system. This is perfection. It talks about a young black woman who is in a cult. She escapes from this cult after having given birth to twins when she was sexually assaulted by the head of the cult. And this story is about her trying to live on her own, about her trying to integrate into some level of society, and the trauma, and it's amazing. Another one for trauma. This one is April, and I read All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque. This I did not expect to love as much as I did. It is a novel all about the experiences of soldiers during World War I. It is so accurate that it was banned by the Nazis during World War II for negatively portraying what it's like to be on the front line as a soldier, because they didn't want people reading this and then being too scared to sign up, or refusing to sign up. This is heart-wrenching and utterly soul-destroying, but beautifully written. The translation for this vintage edition I think is done very well. It retains all of the emotion, and I went into this just like, oh yeah, I'll read this classic, and came out of it with a new 5-star read. Then for May, I read The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, and I read this actually primarily via audiobook, and the audiobook is amazing. Like, it's absolutely fantastic, really well produced, really gets you into the book. Fantastic. This book is about all cities have a life and they are all represented by a person, but New York is so big that they actually have a person for each borough. But something's gone wrong and New York isn't waking up the way that it should and becoming a city the way that it should. And this delves into that along with racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, everything like that. Fantastic. Everyone who is going on about this book is going on about it for a reason. In June, I reread / read for the first time The Mime Order by Samantha Shannon. The weirdness is because this is rewritten, so I've read the original, I have 2 copies on my shelf behind me, and I read the rewrite. So this one, I was not surprised was a 5-star read. I am waiting for my edition of The Song Rising to arrive from the Broken Binding, and when it does, I will be reading / rereading that, and I expect to give that a 5-star as well. I love this series. How to describe the Bone Season? We follow a young girl with essentially magical supernatural powers, and she works for one of the crime bosses in London. But one day she is captured by essentially the police because it's actually illegal to have these powers, and she's sent to a camp, and at this camp she tries to escape, she tries to free people, and the story goes from there. It is going to be a 7-book series. July's favourite was a non-fiction, and this is Owls of the Eastern Ice by Jonathan C. Slaught. This, oh my gosh, so it is a combination of memoir, scientific research, adventure novel. It's, oh, so basically this man in the 90s, he is American, he is a scientific researcher, and he goes to Russia to research these owls. And so you find out about the owls and about their habitats and all of that scientific side of things. The adventure side is because he's going to rural, snowy Russia, and there are times where they are almost cut off, stuck by ice and by rivers, and there's definitely an adventure aspect to it. And then the memoir is because it's not just about the science, he includes the real life in it too, so you learn more about this very rural and isolated area. This is rural Russia in the 90s. Like, phones are a thing, the internet is just about a thing, especially out in the rural areas. There is no communication really with the outside bar people coming in and seeing this environment and how these people then interact with this random American who is the enemy. It's the 90s, showing up. It's just so well written and so engrossing, and I adored it. This, again, like, I expected to enjoy it. Did not expect it to be 5-star, one of my new favourites. August, another one I did mainly via audiobook, and that is European Travel for the Monstrous Gentlewoman by Theodora Goss. Now this is a chunky book, okay? It is somewhere around, it's over 700 pages. And I blasted through the audiobook. Instead of doing anything else, I was just laid in bed listening to this audiobook. I could not put it down. It is the second book in a trilogy, and the first one is, oh god, The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter. Essentially, Theodora Goss has taken well-known and beloved characters from sci-fi books from the Victorian era. So think Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, think Frankenstein, think The Island of Dr. Moreau, and has taken those and created female characters, whether that is a daughter or an experiment that happens to have been made in a female body, and put them into this world and made them little detectives. It's so good. And there's Sherlock and Watson exist in this world as well. They are men, and they are solving mysteries and working together, and it's just so good. It's just so good. Not actually this book, but this book. So in September, The Haunted House on Hollow Hill finished up on the podcast release. So I have since, in January, read this physical book, and this is actually different to the podcast. So, if you have done one and not the other, recommend doing both. But this was originally released weekly as a podcast with a full cast narration with audio effects, and it was absolutely amazing. I was like jumping in public because I was startled because of the amazing sound effects. I was engrossed. Every week I was like, I need the next one. It is a Skullduggery Pleasant story, which is a living skeleton detective, and starts off the series with a young girl, she's in her 30s now, named Valkyrie, and she discovers she has magic and goes along and ends up being a magical detective against all of these murderers with him. This can be read or listened to standalone from the rest of the series. It's really, really fun. I really, really recommend it. It's just a blast of a time. October, not the whole bind-up, but I did love the whole bind-up, but Fellowship of the Ring was my best book of this month. I loved all 3 books, but Fellowship, it was my second time reading it, and oh my gosh, I died. I loved it. If you have not read The Lord of the Rings and you are a fantasy reader, I promise this is worth your time. I put it off for years because it is big, it is intimidating, both because of the size, because it's a classic and it was written a while ago, and also because of the intense fandom around it. But there's so much that has been taken from Lord of the Rings and used across all of the fantasy books that you know and love, and you will recognise those aspects as you read through if you haven't read it yet. And it's just so well done. And finally I'm like, okay, this is why it's so beloved. Because how could it not be? It's perfection. I can't believe I finally read it. Then in November, I do have a physical copy, but it's downstairs and my other half is working right now. And that is Feet of Clay by Terry Pratchett. I have been loving the Discworld series so much, and I've been giving all of them like 4 and 5 stars, but this just happened to be the best book I read in November. Feet of Clay is one of the City Watch books. Essentially the story in this one is that there are creatures made out of clay and they are made humanoid and they are used as servants, or they are basically enslaved, and everyone thinks that they like being enslaved. They have these instructions written into their brain, but they don't. And it's a really good way of looking at enslavement and discrimination, because no one can have any preconceived biases because these are things made of clay. Pratchett has just written like a new creature, and it's humanoid, but it's not something that we have in the real world, so no one comes to the story with their preconceived biases that they may have, which I think was a very good choice from Pratchett. And the way that it's written is filled with Pratchett's usual humour, social commentary. It is absolutely fantastic. I adored it so much. And then, incredibly annoyingly, for December, my best book was Dark Dawn by J. Kristoff, the final book in the Nevernight series. Annoying because J. Kristoff is a racist dickhead. However, he has written really good series. I owned them before he came out as a racist dickhead, so I haven't given him any money since. I have chosen not to buy any more of his books, despite the fact that these 3 all got 5 stars from me. I don't want to support him, but I read this and it was 5 stars. It is amazing. I adore this series. It is so well written. We follow Mia Covert, and she is a young girl whose parents were murdered by the state because they planned a coup, and she is going to get revenge, and it is dark, and it is evil, and it is gritty, and it is funny, and yeah, annoyingly for me, 5 stars. And those are now all backwards, so much for me holding these up in like a nice neat little stack, but these messy books are the 10? There are 12 months in a year, Abigail. These are the 12 best books from each month. So they're not necessarily the 12 highest rated ones I read across the year, but from each individual month, these are the 12 best books. I had an absolutely fantastic time with all of them. I highly recommend them all. You should pick them up. And I can't wait to see what ends up being this one for next year. Like I said relatively near the beginning, if I deconstruct my pile, my favourite book of the year was Saruland by Rivers Solomon. It wasn't even a choice, like I didn't even really get to think about it. This is the only book that wasn't a full reread, Mime Order aside. I reread The Gift and I reread A Christmas Carol, and they are always across the board 10s, and this was the only other book that was 10s that wasn't a reread. So it's unquestionably my best book of the year, even though I loved all of these books. Please let me know down below if you do anything like this. I'd love to see your breakdown for each of the 12 months, but if not, do you have a favourite book of 2024? Please let me know. Thank you so much for watching, folks, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!